Hello, I'm Chris Ossman, and this is Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix
Hello,
America.
I'm coming to you from the hospital today because I dropped off my spouse. She had an issue with driving, but the hospitals are limiting people, the number of people coming in. So in this case, they're limiting just the patient. She's able to get around. There's just some issues with driving, but due to COVID-19, they are limiting the number of people that are coming into the hospital. To try to, do a little bit of social distancing. But this is also, a good time to highlight the fact that, the shortcomings of our healthcare system. When you have a healthcare system that's based on profit motivation, then you have scarcity in the healthcare system. You don't have the healthcare system doing the proper things or taking care of the people in the way that it should. So one of the things that one of the economists that I follow, an independent economist that I follow, mentioned was the fact that in America, instead of us having like stockpile of masks and things like that stored up, which is inefficient or not as profitable or not profitable at all for a lot of companies to store the masks, they chose just not to have the masks. So as the COVID-19 traveled across the planet, it started in China, and then you start seeing it come to America, heading towards America. Instead of us being prepared and taking the necessary steps to be prepared, America chose to worry about profit, put profits over people yet again. And that's how capitalism is supposed to work. That's not a bug of the system. That's a feature of the system. I know I sound repetitive in my videos when I talk about how capitalism does more harm than good for the majority of people. But until people wake up, I will keep harping on that because it's something that people need to realize. A lot of the problems that we face, systemic inequality, systemic brutality of the police, especially with people of color, systemic food shortages. All these problems that come about in America are due to the fact that people are putting profits over people. That the minority of people, the rich, the super rich, are putting profits over people. And that is exactly how capitalism is supposed to work. Capitalism does not work in a way that, okay, yeah, we need to do something that costs more just because it would be, they would have better outcomes for the majority of the people. No, capitalism says whatever is more profitable, that's what we're going to do. And if it harms a bunch of people, it's indifferent to that. Capitalism doesn't care if you have 40 million who face food insecurities on a daily basis. Capitalism doesn't care if you have a bunch of homeless people. Capitalism doesn't care about people. And that's one of the problems with having, corporations as people. That's still idiotic and never made sense to me. Calling a corporation of giving them more rights than people, that's ridiculous. But anyway, back to the healthcare system. In America, our healthcare system is driven by profit motivation. Even with Obamacare, I keep hearing about how Obamacare is, the President Trump is trying to get rid of Obamacare, and that's terrible. Or it would be terrible if Obamacare actually was helpful to the people who can't afford regular health care. Obamacare, I was on Obamacare, and I couldn't afford the best plan. I had to take one of the lower tier plans because that's what I could afford when I was unemployed before. And what that did was it had such a high deductible that I could never use the insurance. It had both dental and it had, the medical care, health care portions of it. And they were two separate things. And I could afford the Obamacare. But I couldn't afford to use it. So what good is a healthcare system that you can't afford to use? Ultimately, Obamacare was a boon to the insurance companies. And the insurance companies made billions of dollars on Obamacare. So there's yet another transfer of wealth because of a capitalist system that we live in. So those are some of the problems that I point out with the healthcare system that we have now. And there are a lot more. Continuing to rely on a profit-driven economic system is continuing to allow more and more people to suffer from the scarcity that capitalism requires. Now, if people were to wake up, maybe not now, because now COVID-19 is, it's going to have they're saying it's not even done with the first wave, and yet we're still going to get a lot more people that are going to be infected. And of course, it's going to be worse. The second wave is going to be even worse, because now, instead of you having 0 people as before the first wave hit, now you have hundreds of thousands of millions of people in America that are going to have COVID-19, and they're going to be passing it around to other people, especially with all the protests with people not wearing masks. So there's no way that the second wave is going to be smaller than the first wave. It's going to be exponentially bigger than the first wave, and people need to be aware of that. And I still find it so odd that people think that this is all a hoax, or it's not as bad as it could be. Because, as I said in the previous video, I know 5 people, actually it's 6 people, I was forgetting to count someone, that have passed away from COVID-19, one being a doctor. And so, these people need to wake up. And if they don't wake up, then, that they run catching COVID at their own peril. For everybody else, stay safe, put your mask on, wash your hands, do everything that we were doing when the scare first hit, because none of that stuff got resolved. Opening the states back up, I don't understand how people were okay with that, because nothing was resolved. It was like they were saying, oh, the curve is starting to flatten a little bit. But they had no cure, they had no vaccine, they had no treatment, they had nothing. They still had a shortage of beds. All the same logistics that were the problem before still exist. And now you're getting shortage of meat, which I'm glad I'm a vegetarian. I've been vegetarian for a couple of years, because I've seen the folly of the way we grow meat now. And it's not good. It's a very inhumane practice, and it's a very unsustainable practice, and it does harm to the environment, along with the other things that mankind has done to harm the environment and to cause climate change in this country. So, America, y'all need to wake up. You all need to wake up, and you need to start looking towards leaders who are actually making a difference. Now, they're not necessarily going to be your elected leaders, because the elected leaders, they have to fight with the other elected leaders. So you have blue, you have red, you have Democrat, you have Republicans, and they never seem to be able to come together. And when they do come together, it's normally something that's bad for the rest of us. It's like they seem to be able to come together on the military spending, the budget. The Democrats, who were supposedly called, they say Trump is crazy, he's the worst thing that's going to happen to America, he's a threat to America, and all this other stuff. And I believe he is. But if I were in Congress, that's the reason why I would not give him more of his military budget than he even asked for. They've given Trump billions more than he even asked for his military budget. Instead of putting that money into a universal health care system, instead of putting that money into free public college for everybody, instead of putting that into providing food and shelter for the homeless and for the poor, they're putting it into the military budget. And they're actually criminalizing the poor, and they're criminalizing the people that try to help the poor. Because I keep reading these new stories about all these cities that are making it so that you have to have a permit to give free food out to the homeless people. And I've seen I've even seen priests where they get arrested for giving out food to the homeless. So they're criminalizing the homeless, and they're criminalizing those people who are trying to help the homeless. There's something wrong with America. There's something wrong with the world. It seems like we are very leaning more towards kind of immoral. It just feels apocalyptic almost, the way that everything is we're demonizing the people who don't have money. We blame them for the problems in the country. We blame them for their poverty. We never look at the fact that they come from communities that had fewer opportunities. Whenever you talk to these white guys on TV, they and talk to them about these economic situations in black communities or communities of color, they always say, oh yeah, those people need to try harder. Those people, even some black leaders or black media people are talking about, yeah, those people need to try harder. Well, when you're given such a disadvantage, where you're put so far behind the race, there's a tendency for people to give up. I saw this great video where this guy offers, it's like 200 kids or whatever. He says, I'm going to give you, whoever gets this race, wins this race to me, gets $100. So he says, but first we're going to play a little game, and I'm going to, ask a bunch of series of questions, and then we'll start the race. So he starts off by asking, things like how many kids had both parental figures in their home, and a bunch of kids take a step forward, but you see a bunch of black kids that didn't take a step forward. And I'm laughing because it's not funny, but it's just the way it appears in the video. And then he asked a series of other questions that deal with the disadvantages that people of color and black people have been put at due to the way our society is set up. And eventually he has all these kids staggered at different distances from him when he finally walks to where he's holding a $100 bill up. And then he says, okay, run the race. So, obviously the kids that are closest have a much better chance to win the race. And the kids that are all the way in the back, which are mostly black people or people of black kids or kids of color, they don't even try to run the race because they realize that there is no point in trying to win the race because they're, 200 feet or 200 yards behind wherever these other kids ended up. So it doesn't make any sense. And that is the same thing that goes along with the rest of society. If you have people that are so disadvantaged, you have people that have lived in neighborhoods where they've had redlining, where they couldn't buy homes after a certain street because of redlining. And then the business owners didn't want to put businesses in those neighborhoods that were below the redlining because those people had less money, they had less opportunity. So it becomes cyclical. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you continue to treat people and their neighborhoods and their communities with disdain, and you give them fewer opportunities to the point where they just don't want to try anymore. So it doesn't make sense for these people to sit there and say, oh yeah, those people need to try harder, they need to pull up themselves up with their bootstraps and everything. And of course there are opportunities out there, I'm not denying that, but the opportunities, there are way more opportunities for people of a certain demographic, people of a certain race. And there are a lot fewer opportunities for people of color and black people and, immigrants and all that other stuff. So, of course, if you have fewer opportunities, you're going to have, people that are trying to go after the same opportunities. And then you'll have people that don't have that drive. It just doesn't feel like they have any choice but to just, go with the status quo and just remain in their, consider their plight as the way that their lives are going to be and the way that their kids' lives are going to be. So America needs to wake up. This inequality is going to have an impact on all of us. People used to look at like black people, and they say, oh, black people act that way because that's the way black people act. And they were talking about poor black people. Now, what a study found out a few years back was that poor white people acted the same as the poor black people. You have the same thing. If you give them similar circumstances, people are going to act like people. It was kind of racist for them to think that, oh, black people act like that because black people act like that, not because they're poor black people. So it was kind of a racist sentiment, and it's been disproven, just like a lot of things have been disproven. I look back a few years, I don't know if it's still the case, but there was a point where middle-aged white men started killing themselves at record numbers. It was an epidemic, and there was a lot of concern about how these middle-aged white guys were killing themselves. And to me, that is an indicator of a white privilege, because black people and people of color have been dealing with the same situations that these white guys were having to deal with. This was after the 2008 economic collapse. So I imagine that white guys are going to be really killing themselves now when all this stuff goes through. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that the reason I look at it as possibly being a white privilege or an indicator of white privilege is because they started killing themselves at record numbers because they were having to face a lot of the same issues that people of color had to deal with for decades and decades. So when they start seeing, I'm not going to have a job, I'm not going to have money, instead of dealing with it like a lot of poor people of color have dealt with it, they were like, I can't deal with it. And they were killing themselves at record numbers. Now, you may argue against that, but like I said, there's no scientific proof behind this. It just seems odd that in a time when we have the Great Recession, something that almost equals the Great Depression, 2008, it seemed odd that all of a sudden just average white guys were just killing themselves, committing suicide, because nobody ever came up with a reason why. And I'm just presenting this as a reason why. Maybe some university, can do a study and figure out if that's the reason why. But anyway, we all need to realize that we're all in this together, and the plight you ignore could become your fate. So America needs to wake up, and we need to look at, our domestic threat right now as the biggest threat in the world, because it's not only impacting America, but it's impacting the rest of the world. We throw our weight around everywhere, and we don't even have our stuff together. We talk about helping other countries for humanitarian reasons, but those other countries always seem to be worse off than they were without our help. We bomb other countries because of the need for America to have their resources. Maybe America should scale back its need for resources, because we are living well above the capacity that Earth can provide. There's a thing called the carrying capacity of Earth, and America lives well above it. And we only have like 5% of the population. But we have statistics that are troublesome. If you only have 5% of the world's population, then you should only have 4 or 5 or 6% of the incarcerated in the world. But America has 25% of the incarcerated people in the world. And, those people are what I call new slaves, because the 13th Amendment does not cover people who are convicted of crimes. And then those people are put to work and by the private prison corporations that utilize their labor for their benefit, because they get paid by companies like McDonald's. And I always use these same examples, but McDonald's and Victoria's Secrets. And I always say, a convicted felon does not owe a debt to McDonald's, does not owe a debt to Victoria's Secret. It owes a debt to society. So why are convicted felons being put to work for these private corporations? America, wake up. There's too many problems in this country, and it all stems to the wealth inequality that's going on in this country. Now, I did create a petition which could work as a starter point for legislation that would eliminate this lie that the rich are job creators. The rich aren't job creators. The rich create jobs when their service or their products have a need to create those jobs. And if you have no consumers, then you do not hire people to just sit around. The rich are not going to hire people to just sit around for the most part. They're only going to hire people when they start selling products. Because if that was the case, that the rich were job creators, then with this pandemic and the economic collapse, why did they lay people off? Because if they're job creators, they had no need to lay people off. They had to lay people off because nobody was buying their service or nobody was buying their products. The airlines, they're going to lay people off. They've laid people off. All these companies have laid people off because there was no need for their product or service because nobody was out there. So if they were actually just creating jobs out of thin air and were job creators, then all right, fine. They should still have those jobs created. But that doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense before. It doesn't make sense now. And the petition I created, just look it up. It's called In the Job Creator Lie. And you will find that it's on signon.org. I put it on Move On, but I think they've changed whatever. Just look up In the Job Creator Lie, and you will see that there is a better way. There's a way to save money so that you're not just giving people who may or may not create the jobs that they say they're going to create. So you don't just give them money up front. You subsidize those jobs that they do create. And you require that they keep those people on that they've hired. They don't just create the jobs, get the money from the program, and then fire them. There are ways to fix things, and there are solutions. And that's why I made my book. It's called Solutions, Enough Complaining, Let's Fix America. And it provides solutions to some of the biggest problems. And as I say, as a disclaimer in the book, I always say, look, they might not be the right solutions, but they're at least solutions. They're either from me or from other people. And they are solutions that that could make changes. It's a lot better than not doing anything. And our government is not doing anything. Our government is not taking care of the people of this nation. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way America runs now. And until Americans wake up and they stop, being distracted by a lot of these other things, they're never going to fix anything. Right now, we've got these George Floyd protests, and that's a good thing to protest, is obviously police murder. But there's something that underlies those murders. There's always money underlying it. Now, why would the police be so brutal, and why would the police be killing people, if not to protect something? But they're not protecting the people by doing this, because a lot of times they're killing innocent people. They're killing them for stupid minor infractions of the law. They're killing them when they don't even resist arrest. They're just killing people. Why would that be the case? It's to keep a certain sector of society in check, and it's to maintain a power structure that does not benefit you. It does not benefit me. It does not benefit most of the people in this country. It only benefits those who are in control, and it needs to stop. Anyway, this was a long rambling video, but I just, sometimes I get on a roll, and this is more or less how I feel about all this stuff. There are so many problems in this country that need to be addressed, and underlying almost all of them is money, and the problems that money and capitalism have created over the decades. So join me again for another Solutions Enough Complaining. Let's Fix America, and we'll get on to something else. But, first off, let's get rid of all this inequality. Let's get rid of all this wealth theft that's going on around the country. Join me again. Thank you.